What's going on, guys? It's Brad from Rabid Games here, and welcome back to yet another Kerbal Space Program video, the first one in 1.1 as of its full release, obviously. I wanted to make this video today to cover something a little bit different, mix it up a little bit on the channel, and talk about something that actually happened in space flight history, because obviously the anniversary of it is coming up, and I kind of want to do more of these in the future. So if you do like this video, then do let me know in the comments down below, and I will be sure to do another one from time to time, just because I find this sort of stuff about history of spaceflight kind of interesting. I have no idea what the gameplay in the background is going to be at the moment, probably some Kerbal Space Program gameplay of some kind, but I guess you'll have to watch it for what it is and enjoy it while I talk about this incredibly tragic, I guess, piece of spaceflight history. I am, of course, talking about the historic and rather heroic death of the cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov aboard Soyuz 1, which was the first manned flight of the Soyuz capsule that is now regarded in modern day as one of the most reliable spacecraft around, and the only one that can actually carry humans for the moment as of recording this video. Our story begins, of course, on April 11th, 1961, with the launch of Vostok 1, with Yuri Gagarin aboard. This, of course, was the first ever manned flight, and it was carried out by the Soviet Union. Of course, the Vostok capsule wasn't all that great. He couldn't actually land in it, so when Yuri Gagarin achieved his orbital flight and came back to Earth, he of course had to eject about 7 kilometers above the surface, but nevertheless he did actually become the first man in space. With the Soviet Union obviously thinking themselves as masters of propaganda, Yuri Gagarin instantly became somewhat of a national hero, and rightly so. He has clearly made history not just for the Soviet Union, but for the world. He was put on display and went on tours all across the world to show off the first man in space. And to begin with, Gagarin enjoyed this cushy position within the Russian government, and was very close to the premier of the time by the name of Nikita Khrushchev. However, because Gagarin was such an important national asset, Russia didn't really want to lose him, or rather the Soviet Union didn't really want to lose him, and so as a result he was prevented from flying, be it in spaceships or in jets, as he was a fighter pilot to begin with, indefinitely. He was told by the elusive Russian government that he may get the chance to fly again in the future. However, this was nothing more than propaganda, because they quite simply didn't want him killed if something was going wrong, because it would be a massive embarrassment to the Soviet Union. All this, understandably, made Gagarin pretty pissed. He was a man who very much enjoyed the art of flight, and so being denied to actually do it, even though it was kind of his job, understandably, he started to become a little bit disgruntled with the whole situation. This whole situation wasn't made any better when Khrushchev was removed from power via a coup, and Brezhnev was put in charge as a new premier, who saw Gagarin as a sort of product of the Brezhnev era, and not liking the way Brezhnev ran the Soviet Union, he sort of pushed Gagarin to the sidelines even more. Meanwhile, the Soviet space program was winning the space race by miles. The Vostok and Voskhod programs had proved to be massively successful, and the Soviet Union was in the middle of planning their latest triumph, the 3-man Soyuz capsule that would eventually take their men to the moon. However, early unmanned test flights of this new Soyuz capsule and launch vehicle were less than successful. Of the 4 test flights that were accomplished, all 4 managed to explode either on the launch pad or at some point during ascent. It really wasn't looking very good, if I'm honest. The now empowered Brezhnev was getting impatient with the Soyuz program. He wanted the first manned flight to take place on the 50th anniversary of the Communist Revolution in the Soviet Union, and so all of these problems really weren't helping their progress. As a result, an ambitious first mission was planned for the Soyuz capsule, with 2 being launched, one with 1 cosmonaut aboard and one with 3. These would then meet up in orbit, and 2 cosmonauts would transfer over, with the 2 craft then able to re-enter separately and return safely to the Earth. The cosmonaut to be sent up first on his own in a Soyuz capsule was Vladimir Komarov, who happened to be a very good friend of Gagarin's. The both of them would often go hunting and were practically brothers in terms of their relationship with one another. Both Gagarin and Komarov were aware of the issues during the Soyuz test flights, and so as a result they were extremely concerned for Komarov's safety. They tried practically every trick in the Soviet book to try and get the flight cancelled or at least moved to a later date so that potential problems could be fixed. Komarov even stood up at a highly controlled Soviet press conference and voiced his safety concerns about the new spacecraft, but after a Soviet official had a quiet word in his ear, Komarov simply stood up and said the following: "I am ready and excited to fly aboard this mission and will overcome any difficulties the way a true communist should." This of course drove Gagarin over the edge. He pleaded with Soviet officials for Komarov not to go, and in fact he got so desperate that they named him as Komarov's backup pilot. Although this was probably a ploy by the Soviet Union in order to force Komarov into making the flight. Komarov of course knew just what an asset Gagarin was to the Soviet Union, even though he had fallen out of favour with Brezhnev's government. On the morning of the 23rd of April 1967, as Komarov to much fanfare suited up for the maiden flight of the Soyuz, Gagarin was becoming more and more irrational, and in fact at one point had to be restrained as he was demanding a spacesuit to go up with Komarov. All this however was in vain, and Komarov launched, and surprisingly the Soyuz didn't explode. However, once it got into orbit, the problem started almost immediately. The solar arrays on the Soyuz capsule, for example, failed to properly deploy, meaning that the capsule was not getting as much power as it needed to fill its batteries up. Couple this with guidance and navigation system failures, and Komarov soon had a spacecraft that was tumbling out of control. These problems, coupled with thunderstorms in Baikonur, prevented the launch of Soyuz 2, thus sparing the lives of the 3 cosmonauts that would have joined Komarov up in space. Komarov, being one of the most experienced pilots in the Soviet Union, switched all the systems in his spacecraft to manual, and was thus able to abort the mission, bringing the Soyuz capsule under control and orienting it correctly for re-entry. However, this drained what little power there was remaining in the Soyuz batteries, meaning that once re-entry was over, there was simply not enough power left to deploy the parachute. Komarov, inside of his Soyuz descent module, slammed into the ground at Baikonur with the force of a 2.5-ton meteorite at over 600 miles per hour. There's actually footage of this, as well as the audio recording of Komarov's last words, available on YouTube. I'm not going to link it in the description or show it in here because it is kind of dark and a bit grim, but you guys can search that up for yourselves because it is pretty dark, to be honest. Suffice to say, not much of the Soyuz capsule or Komarov, in fact, remained. The most recognisable piece of Komarov that was found was his heel bone. With the Soviet Union obviously being the Soviet Union at the time, they had a kind of sick way of telling Valentina, Komarov's wife, about her husband's tragic death. They said that her husband had miraculously survived the re-entry accident, but that on his way back he had been killed in a bus crash. They also cut her phone lines in order to stop her from finding out the truth from Gagarin, who eventually told her anyway in person. The Soviet media were left in confusion on how to report this story, and initially the Soviet government were going to go with the bus crash story. But if it wasn't for Yuri Gagarin going straight to Brezhnev himself and pleading with him that they tell the truth, that Komarov did indeed die a communist hero at the controls of an experimental spacecraft, it's quite possible that Komarov's flight would have simply been erased from history. Or at least covered up to the point of being so obscure that no one would ever really be sure what actually happened. Yuri Gagarin insisted in an open casket funeral for what was left of Vladimir Komarov to really make an embarrassment out of the flight and the failed safety proceedings that had gone about with it. Unsurprisingly, this led to huge national embarrassment for the Soviet Union, and probably led to Yuri Gagarin falling even more out of favour with the Soviet government. And conspiracy theorists put forward the argument today that there is a lot of evidence that the MiG jet crash that Yuri Gagarin was ultimately killed in was rigged by the Soviet government due to their immense dislike for him. Nevertheless, the story of Vladimir Komarov is one less known in the history of spaceflight, but one that should definitely not be forgotten, as I think it really stands to show some of the errors in the management and indeed ethics of the Soviet space program of the era. I also hate to see brave heroes from whatever side of the Iron Curtain they're on get simply forgotten due to the sands of time or indeed corrupt governments covering them up. So the next time you see a Soyuz dock to the space station, just remember, if it wasn't for the heroics of Vladimir Komarov, chances are that vehicle would still be very unsafe. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Sorry it's been quite long compared to a lot of the ones I've been doing recently. I hope you guys enjoyed it, because I definitely enjoyed researching all this sort of thing, and let me know in the comments down below if you want me to do more stories from space. I guess that's what I'll call this sort of mini-series. I probably won't make this weekly or anything because, well, it takes a long time to research. I'll probably just do them every now and then when I find a topic that's particularly interesting or something. But if you've got any ideas, any suggestions that you want me to talk about and research, then do let me know in the comments down below, because I'm interested in space history. It's one of the coolest parts, personally, for me. So if you do have any suggestions, leave them in the comments down below. Also, I am having a Q&A for when we reach 1,500 subscribers, in case you didn't already know. So leave any questions you have for me in the comments down below. I'll try and answer as many as possible when I do get around to making that video. But yeah, that's pretty much going to round it off for this episode, guys. If you did enjoy, please do remember to like and subscribe for more awesome content in the future. My name is Brothers, and as always, peace out.